Good afternoon, and welcome to this conversation between RCC's president, Dr. Michael Baston, and Dr. Marcia Cantarella, author of I Can Finish College, the Overcome Any Obstacle and Get Your Degree Guide. My name is Dr. Katie Lynch, and I am the chair of the Sam Draper Honors Program at Rockland Community College. The Honors Program is one of the co-sponsors of this wonderful event, in addition to RCC's TRIO program and the college's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Before we begin, I'm going to ask you to fill out a quick poll that will help us contextualize today's discussion. That poll will pop up on your screen. It's going to be very easy for you to complete, and I'll read the questions out loud when they appear. So first of all, and take your time on this, are you or were you the first person in your family to attend college? Secondly, what is or was the most significant influence in your choice to attend and or finish college? Third, do you have any questions about how to be successful in college? Number 4, which issues are you interested in hearing more about today? And you can choose as many of those as you'd like. So we'll give it about a minute and we'll wait to see the results come in, and then we'll begin our event in just a few seconds. So if you look at question number 1, are you or were you the first person in your family to attend college? We have about a quarter of us that said yes, which is wonderful. Congratulations, that is a tremendous accomplishment. Number 2, what is or was the most significant influence in your choice to attend or finish college? And there's, my own goals is the one that sort of pulled ahead here, which is wonderful that people are feeling motivated themselves. But of course, parents and teachers and guidance counselors are also deeply influential here. In question number 3, the response, do you have questions about how to be successful in college? About a quarter of us do. And what's really exciting about that is that you'll have a chance to ask those questions. That will be a part of today's presentation. And then our final question, which issues are you interested in hearing more about today? The winner here is finding networks and building relationships. That networking and building relationships is not something we're often taught to do. And I think that will be a really important thing to discuss today. But of course, there are also some other really important answers, such as how to overcome the inevitable challenges that will confront us when we're trying to finish college and obtain a degree, including how do we identify those study skills and time management skills that will help us be academically successful. So thank you to everybody who filled out the poll. And I am now delighted to introduce the person who will facilitate today's conversation, someone who is, of course, very special to the RCC community. Dr. Michael A. Baston is Rockland Community College's president and is an adjunct instructor in legal studies and paralegal studies. Dr. Baston began his professional career as a public interest lawyer representing educational corporations, religious institutions, and nonprofit organizations. His work with academic clients led him to pursue a second career in academia as both a professor of legal studies and business and as a student affairs administrator. Dr. Baston was recently named to the board of directors of the American Association of Community Colleges, the AACC, the primary advocacy organization for the nation's community colleges, where he also serves on their Commission on Institutional Infrastructure and Transformation. And of course, the entire community is so proud of and thankful for Dr. Baston's work in that organization. As a National Guided Pathways and Equity Transfer Initiative coach for the AACC, he is noted for his work with 2- and 4-year college leadership teams around the nation, helping them integrate student success initiatives to advance college completion and labor market entry success. And of course, student success is the topic of our conversation today. Dr. Baston, thank you for facilitating this wonderful discussion. I am going to turn things over to you.
Dr. Lynch, thank you so much. So glad to have you and this wonderful opportunity to introduce to our community a phenomenally important person in higher education, Dr. Marcia Cantarella. And I want to tell our community a little bit about Dr. Cantarella. Marcia Cantarella has been the Associate Dean at Hunter College, a Dean at Princeton University, part of the Dean's staff at NYU in the College of Arts and Science, and for more than 15 years had corporate experience working as the Director of Public Affairs and then in marketing at Avon Products. She has written a breakthrough book for so many students who are trying to understand how to navigate the complexities of college choice. And her book that she's going to discuss with us today is I Can Finish College. how you can overcome any obstacle and get your degree, and a guide that she has written in this regard. I am excited to have Dr. Cantarella with us today. She has done so many wonderful things in education and beyond, and it is my pleasure to bring her on with us today. Welcome, 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 Dr. Cantarella. So good to have you with us today.
Thank you. I am just so delighted to be here to engage with you. You have impressed me as well. So this is just terrific. And it looks like you have a phenomenal team that you have put together. So very impressive, sir.
Well, thank you. You are so extraordinary and so kind to be with us today. I want you to respond as my first question to this quote. Every man is our brother, and every man's burden is our own. Where poverty exists, all are poorer. Where hate flourishes, all are corrupted. Where injustice reigns, all are unequal. What does that sentiment mean to you?
Well, that is a quote from my father, the late Whitney Young Jr. And it also, reflects his own upbringing. My father, before he became the celebrated civil rights leader that he was, grew up on the campus of Lincoln Institute in Kentucky, and so he was raised by educators. His father at Lincoln Institute had a school that was supported by the white community, but its objective was to train young people of color to be in subservient roles, just do it better, right? And when they weren't around, which was 90% of the time, my grandfather had a curriculum that was a college prep curriculum. And so my father and his sisters who all went to the school and everybody else who went to the school went off to college. And so my father learned early on the importance of educating people, of equity, seeing his mother as a role model in terms of her kindness as well as her very high standards. She used to correct my thank you notes. But that's where he came from. And so those words really reflect very much who he was and as well as his strategic direction.
Well, as one of the organizers of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, what do you think your father would think about the Black Lives Matter movement and demonstrations today?
Well, on one hand, I think he might be saddened because we are here again. It was the 1960s. I'm a child of the 60s. I was in my teens and in college in the 60s. And so, yeah, we were marching for civil rights. We were doing all kinds of stuff. It was the emergence of the women's movement. And we got a lot done. The Civil Rights Act, the Equal Pay Act, the War on Poverty, which my father crafted with President Johnson. All sorts of things were the corporate responsibility. That was my first career, was doing corporate responsibility work at Avon. And I was part of a tribe of a bunch of us from major corporations. And that's because my father instilled in the CEOs the importance of doing that. And so in some ways, it feels like we've taken, maybe took 5 steps forward, and now we've taken 2 steps back, and we're having to have people renew that commitment. Again, we're seeing the private sector beginning to renew that commitment. There had been some attrition along the way in terms of our graduation rates, especially among young men. I think, we now begin to see that turning around, but it would have been so much better if we just could have kept, an upward trajectory instead of moving backwards and having to kind of revive in the form of the Black Lives Matter movement, so much of the work that was done in the 60s.
Well, your father was a true pioneer in so many different ways and really a social engineer. How do you think your father would continue to address systematic racism in days like the ones we live in now?
I think he was politically very savvy, and he nurtured the relationship with President Johnson. Um, Sometimes I think probably over a glass of bourbon and telling a good story, because that would appeal to President Johnson. But you do what you got to do. Um, uh, but but he did know how to engage with people individually, and look at what people needed to hear in order to make them do what they needed to do. And so I think some of that is beginning to emerge now in the Black Lives Matter movement, that this isn't going to be just kind of a one and done. This is going to be action across several different sectors, whether it's the private sector re-engaging in different ways, or whether it's Stacey Abrams mobilizing us politically. We are back at it, and so I think he would be saddened, but also grateful that leadership seems to be emerging and strategy seem to be emerging, and so much of that is coming from young people again.
And I would imagine there was a time when so much of what your dad was doing was influencing you. One of his quotes, which I just love, "I'm not anxious to be the loudest voice or the most popular, but I would like to think that at a critical moment, I was an effective voice of the voiceless and an effective hope of the hopeless." And could you tell us, living in that kind of household, being impacted, what was the impact of your father's work on your life and your career?
Absolutely. I was very lucky that I had my father's respect, and he was always very honest with me. I remember I challenged him. I was probably about 14. I challenged him on something or other, and the next day he came home from work with a briefcase full of information he had had the Urban League Research Department put together to refute my point of view. And so that was my first lesson on evidence, right? But then I was able to turn that back to his advantage a number of years later when I was in college. And again, we were all involved in the anti-war movement, partly because there were so many young Black men who were dying in Vietnam. My father, unlike Martin Luther King, couldn't take an anti-war position. He had fought in World War II. He was a sergeant, and he knew that there were these young Black men who were fighting and dying in Vietnam, and he visited them on a couple of occasions. He would wear military fatigues. He would go to the hospitals. So, and he wanted to maintain a cordial relationship with President Johnson so as to get the war on poverty done. So he couldn't say what he might have said. He was at a dinner, he was talking to McGeorge Bundy, who was seated next to him. And so I was in college. I had been taking part in teach-ins on the campus, where we would go after dinner and go to classrooms and learn about the war, learn about the issues. And so I had been sharing what I had learned with my dad. So during the dinner, he tells McGeorge Bundy what his daughter thought of the war. And at the end, he introduces me to McGeorge Bundy. He said, "This is my daughter whose views I was telling you." And then Daddy left me there with the Undersecretary of State to continue to share my views. And I ran into McGeorge Bundy decades later, and he said that I was right. But my dad trusted me, but he also informed me, and I learned things about evidence, and how to engage with all kinds of people, and how to think about organizational structure. When I was probably about 16, I was at an Urban League conference with him, and the chair of the board's daughter and I were good friends. We were the same age. There was always a white executive who chaired the Urban League board because that's where the money was. So, so this white executive's daughter and I were good friends. And we decided, as we looked at the Urban League board, who were all people who were probably in their 40s, maybe 50s, but we decided that these were old folks, and what did they know about youth that they could determine what should happen in terms of youth programming, and that needed to be addressed. Where was the youth voice? So we went to my dad and raised this question, and my father said, "You may have a point. The board's meeting, on Thursday. Why don't you make a presentation?" And we did. I have no idea what we said, but but within a couple of years or so, they did decide that there would be 2 under 30 representatives on the Urban League board, and that continues to this day. My son was one of them at one point. So, I felt listened to. I felt like, I could strategize. So it was a powerful example, and I just had extraordinary opportunities.
And it's so powerful to think about your own journey, because you then transitioned sort of that work. And how did you really get into higher education?
It's a series of coincidences. I had been doing some work on leadership and women, and I was at an organization called Catalyst, which did a lot of research on women's issues. And then someone suggested that there was a project at the Stern School at NYU. And so I took on that project, and I was on a campus again. And I had grown up, on my grandparents' campus when my dad was at Atlanta University. So much of my life was around school, and I just felt very at home. It felt like this was right. And a good friend told me that there was an opening in the dean's office at the College of Arts and Science at NYU. And I applied, and they took me despite my weird credentials. And it ended up being, a total game changer, because part of my responsibility was building something that had just barely gotten started, the Academic Achievement Program in the College of Arts and Science. And a program meant to assure that students of color actually performed at the level that we all knew they were capable of, and that the outcomes would be what we knew that they should and could be. And that was an extraordinary opportunity for me. I had other things in my portfolio. I was allowed to be very entrepreneurial, but those students taught me a lot. At first, I was a little bossy, and they pushed back. And I had one of those 3 o'clock in the morning epiphanies. I woke up and I realized, when I was their age and I was in college, I was at Bryn Mawr, and we were turning everything upside down. And I thought, yeah, why don't I just let them do them, right? Why don't I let the students take the lead? And, we had some parameters and goals, and but how it was going to get done, I let them do. I mean, to the point where on Wednesday afternoons at 5, I would have to leave my office because I had a conference table and they needed it for their meetings. We set a tone and a standard that what we said to the students is that the objective was that one of these days they were going to take over the place, whatever that place was, right? We had 5 of our students who were the university commencement speakers. The alumni are all over the place, and still in touch with each other and doing amazing things. And you know, they are the evidence of what we are capable of. And so I've kind of carried that methodology with me in the rest of my work.
And so working with the students at NYU, and then you, of course, were, of course, at Hunter for a period of time, and you've been doing a lot of work around the Black Male Initiative at the City University of New York. So you have been very active. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those breakthrough strategies that really resulted from some of these initial learnings in working with students?
Yeah, I believe in letting students lead. And so in our Black Male Initiative, the program at Hunter, which is the one I work with, we established team leaders. And so the advisement process isn't a top-down one, it's a peer-to-peer. We identify students who, you know, are already doing well, are well situated in school, you know, kind of modeling what we hope everyone will do. And we give them a cohort of other students that, you know, they help nurture along. And that was part of the model that I had also used at NYU. It's not, you know, it's not about the adults being bossy. It's assuming that, you know, students have capacity. And so that's been an important piece. Identifying role models, bringing speakers to campus who are, you know, young men, executives of color, or not. One of my former Princeton students, and I just heard this yesterday, he mentored one of my Black Male Achievement student, Black Male Initiative students. And that student, who is now at Bloomberg, was giving a talk yesterday to other students. And so he was mentoring students from around the country on Zoom as a result of his having been mentored by this white Princeton student who owed me one because I helped him identify a topic for his junior thesis and he won the thesis prize. So he owed me and he delivered.
Well, clearly you have a passion for students. Let's talk a little bit about I Can Finish College. Give us a sense of sort of, you know, what are the key issues that most students encounter during their college experience?
I think the thing that I have noticed that has been the biggest kind of barrier issue has been silence. Suffering in silence. The fear of asking questions or asking for help. The fear of being thought less than if you ask for help or if you ask questions. And what I hope to impress on students is the idea that colleges are, by definition, a place of inquiry. That's what faculty members do, is they are inquiring all the time and solving problems and trying to learn how things work. So inquiry is natural. It's what we all do. And to be able to have students kind of break through that and become empowered by developing relationships, whether it's with advisors, deans, faculty, and each other, maybe especially each other. So freshmen are talking to upperclassmen. So faculty aren't, I wrote a blog for the Huffington Post once called The Saga of the Lonely Professor. You know, because, you know, we put out our office hours and yeah, nobody shows up, right? You know, Or, you ask, students to raise their hands if they've got questions, and nobody raises their hands, right? And so I wanted to kind of break through some of that thinking, but also showing what some of the things are that are available to students, that are challenges that are not unusual. So you're not alone if you have this particular feeling or you're having this particular problem. You are not the first, and that it is okay. It is okay. So that's kind of a central theme.
And in your book, one of the chapters focuses on financing your education. So what strategies do you recommend students employ in managing their financial resources during college?
Well, there is a budget. There's a page that says, let's figure it out. There is a budget. Figuring out what your needs are and how you're going to spend your money. Again, take advantage of the financial aid office. They are not there just to bother you when your tuition is due. They're also to help you figure this out. I have a cousin who was actually a financial aid officer in Chicago, and that's really how he defines his work, is helping students to make it work. But it's not going to happen if the student doesn't take control and say, I'm in trouble. Here, I don't know if this is going to work, or something has changed in my family situation. The suffering in silence isn't going to help. So doing some forward planning is part of it, but also tapping into the resources that are available and the strategies that are available. Sometimes there are scholarships out there that are niche scholarships. That's like, it may be the scholarship for people who were born in Rockland, and I've seen those kinds of things, right? And nobody knows it exists. And so nobody applies for that money. You can find that stuff out if you tap your resources.
Interestingly enough, in doing some preparing for this session, one of the quotes that your dad had that I think is very, very, it taps right into your book. He says, it's better to be prepared for an opportunity and not to have one than to have an opportunity and not be prepared. So thinking about how students choose majors and their careers and the plans that they're making. And in your book, you really talk about which courses and things like that. Could you share some insights for our students? Sort of, how do you help them figure out how to get on a plan, on a path to something really great?
Well, the first thing I say to them at this point is, and I think it's especially true right now, there is no plan. Right? I thought I was going to go to law school when I was in college. I didn't go to law school. I ended up on this corporate path, and then that changed. And then I ended up doing a PhD and ending up in the academic world. I know very few people whose lives are linear. Usually they're doctors, right? and even not always, some of them. I have one of my former NYU students who is a doctor, but he's also helping to run NYU Hospital. So he's an administrator.
Sure.
So, a student will come in and say that they want to be pre-med, and that in their mind, they have to major in chemistry. They have to do a science, but you don't. You have to take 5 science courses, but you don't have to major in it. You can find something else that you love and will do well in, and you'll do well in it because you love it, right? So you're willing to do the work. You're not battling with yourself to do the work. And then you're also packing in a bunch of other stuff. And by other stuff, I mean, whether it's your athletic activities or other extracurricular activities, clubs, organizations, student government, all of those create the package that you will then put in front of the world. And in that process, ideally, if you're communicating with people, then you're also building networks. And the networks will lead you kind of from point A to point B. Sometimes you need to help it along. And so, you know, you've got your LinkedIn group or your other social media contacts. A lot of serendipity plays into it. So students have to give up the idea of a linear life. And I think, again, the pandemic has helped to shake that idea up. But it was true even before. So look to do those things in college, which are going to set you in the best light, which will mean you're going to major in something that you're going to not mind spending a lot of time in the library doing, because it's really interesting to you. So you want to leave college with, you know, really wonderful grades because you really like those classes and you built relationships with those faculty. And then you also want to have, you know, all of those extracurricular things and those internships that you had, so that you have this whole package that you're putting out to the world.
Love it. I mean, it's so interesting that you talk about the linear path. Today, I'm a college president, but I didn't go to college to become a college president. You know, I was going to be a public interest lawyer and did that for a little bit, but realized that you can do public interest work, whether you're a lawyer or not. You know, the work that we do with public institutions to really provide, you know, opportunity is public interest work. So you're so right. You know, it's about building those sort of, you know, having enough of your mind open to see the possibilities, but also having important people along the way. In your book, you really talk about, you know, who are your people? Give us a sense for the students of who some of their people should be.
Well, some of their people should be each other.
Yes.
And ideally, you know, the people who are on your same wavelength, who are thriving, upperclassmen, who are doing well, you know, learn from them which classes to take and which classes not to take, or all of that stuff. But you know, also, you know, if you have a sport, if you have, you want to do social justice work on, you know, in the community. What are the things that you want to do, that you care about, that you find yourself engaged in? And so that's where you start to build what I consider your tribe, right? And some of those should be administrators. I had one young man at Princeton, and he and I are really good friends now. He's you know, he's a big deal guy now these days. He was a White House fellow, and he's done all sorts of stuff. And he lives around the corner from me. But he would come to my office and complain about, there was a course he was taking that he absolutely hated. And so after every class, he'd end up in my office and complain about this course. And then he'd get it off his chest and then he'd leave. Right? That was fine. However you choose to use the resources available, they're available. That's what we get paid to do. We do this stuff because we love doing this stuff. We are there for you. We are not meant to be intimidating. We are there to help the students become the best they can be.
I love that. But also, Dr. Lynch asked a question. So how can colleges change the way we do things to better prepare students for a non-linear life? I love that question.
That is an excellent question. And one of them, I think, has to do with your alumni. The extent to which you bring alumni back to talk to students. I'm a graduate of Bryn Mawr. and all women's college. The career office wanted to kind of shift directions. When I was in college, the career office virtually didn't exist because women weren't supposed to have careers. So it wasn't considered important, but it is now. And so the head of that office created an alumni advisory board that is made up of people who are, bankers and lawyers and, academics and whatever, so that we are a network resource for the office. But one of the things that we did as a committee was to help the college identify additional, over and beyond LinkedIn, additional spaces for networking, so that we could tap into all of the alumni and make it possible for current students to identify alumni all over the world. And during the pandemic, we've been doing that in really interesting ways, some which have nothing to do with careers. Once a month on Zoom, we have a craft night where those of us who do crafts, and I'm one of them, we do our crafts, and we've had people, Zooming in from Australia and all over, and Japan and whatever, and we're all together and we're talking about our lives and what we're doing. So just having that sense of community on the campus, of accessibility, of and that it doesn't end in 4 years or 2 years, it continues, that you continue because you've got a set of shared experiences. You've spent time together with the same people, doing the same things in the same space. That's a unique experience to you. So your alumni relationships are important, short-term and long-term.
And I think as a result of the pandemic, we probably have more opportunities to leverage alumni than ever before with LinkedIn, with Facebook and things like that. And I think that is a powerful strategy leaning into the future. In chapter 9, your chapter on when it feels like a crisis, we have probably gone through an extraordinary, stretching, emotional set of crises, certainly throughout the course of these last 18 months, with respect to the triple sort of storms, if we would call it a perfect storm, sort of the atmospheric conditions of the health pandemic, the economic pandemic, and the social justice pandemics that we have been dealing with. And so for students that would normally feel like something's a crisis, it has been really exacerbated by these events. Can you talk a little bit about, sort of what you were thinking in that chapter and how it could actually be even more broadly applied given what we have just sort of lived through and are continuing to journey through?
Yeah, this has been a really remarkable year. And I think, for colleges, and as you know, I serve on the board of St. Elizabeth University, so it's a tiny school. We have had a lot of conversations, small committee conversations about how we navigate this space as well. And one of the things has been accessibility. And going back to the hesitation that students have about asking for help, saying I'm in trouble, and feeling that somehow that's going to damage their record or damage how people feel about them, helping them to get over that fear and to know that, what people who work in universities get paid for, the pittance that universities get paid is because we want to be helpful, right? And so whether it's, that student who used to come in, close my office door and rant about this particular professor, or really, really serious situations where, we're talking about just, literally life and death scenarios behind my office doors. The students need to feel that this is a safe space, and that as administrators, as faculty, you are available, but that they are also available to each other, that, the students themselves. My Black Male Initiative group has created a couple of years ago a group called GPA Defenders, and they would meet, once a week, get together for 2 or 3 hours to just study together. No tutorial, just hanging out and studying together. If somebody was having a challenge, they might ask somebody else in the room, but they'd bring snacks and they would study together. That migrated online. It continued this year in an online environment without the snacks. But they became their own support team, right? And what I call safe space. I'm a believer in safe space, where you can share whatever is going on. And as administrators, we can help students identify those safe spaces. Sometimes they will be within the campus community. It may be a chaplain on campus. It may be a mental health counselor. It may be a support organization like AA or whatever for substance abuse. But sometimes it's just us. Sometimes, we are the support, and sometimes it's, we can be that supportive voice. But the student has to take the first step and say, I need to talk. I need to talk to somebody. I need some help. And so to the extent that we on our side can make that okay, then that's doing a really good thing. And I think it's something that students then carry with them afterwards.
Powerful. I mean, what we know is that as they have navigated through so much over the course of these many months, helping institutions to start to do enabling work for some of these small groups and using what we call virtual interest groups. That's something that we can in higher education really enable and support and concretize to make sure that students move forward. I love the GPA Defender idea as well. I just think that is so spot on. So many of the students will be moving on when they graduate. Some will go to four-year institutions. Some will go right into the world of work. What advice would you have for students in terms of getting the kind of experience necessary that gets you into those transfer institutions or right into the world of work? What are some of the experiences that are must-haves for our students?
One is internships. Some kind of work experience, paid or unpaid. I think, again, as a result of the pandemic, some opportunities have kind of emerged in terms of people kind of just stepping up to take care of other people. And whether it's creating a soup kitchen or whatever, some of that has been happening organically in the community. Mm-hmm. Some of our young men from our Black Male Initiative got together and decided as an outing, one of their first outings coming out of quarantine, they went and gave blood. And their excitement about doing it wasn't about giving blood. It was the first time they were seeing each other in a long time, right? So finding opportunities to do stuff, some of that stuff has to be work stuff. So finding those entry-level jobs. There are lots of programs out there now that help. There's one in New York called Project Baston, which helps students prepare for entering into the corporate world. So finding those kinds of initiatives, being able to shadow alumni, or talking to alumni about internship possibilities in their firms. Talking about, paid employment in their firms. But the experiences that students have, whether they have a chance to be leaders while they're in school and see what leadership feels like and understanding that, is part of that building the resume that's going to get the foot in the door. So all of these things, I think, come together for a student. And the student may not even realize the value of it until years later, when they kind of look up and say, oh, I know where I learned how to do that. I'm comfortable doing that because I've done that before. And they have to be open. They just have to be open to the reality that it's not going to be linear. That first job may not be the job that they thought they were going to have. It could look very different. The path isn't going to be a straightforward path. And so just, roll with it. When people are saying they want you, roll with it.
I love it. I love it. And we do have some students over time that may have academic difficulties. What advice would you have for those students?
Again, it's about talking to people. Go to your professor and tell them you're having trouble. Go in, say, look, I have not understood what's gone on in class for the past couple of sessions. And can you help me understand, these concepts that I'm really struggling with? Going to the professor is one thing. There are other resources available on campus. I'm sure you have tutors. And, making use of those resources. It's been a while, but there was a study that showed that the students who took advantage of those resources most typically were not the students whose GPAs were towards the bottom. They were the students with the GPAs that were already towards the top, right? And all students need to understand it's okay. This is, college is a place of inquiry. We don't begin with the assumption that we know everything. We begin with the assumption that we don't know a whole lot. And so whatever the ways are that you can learn, sometimes it's going to be from an upperclassman. But the resources exist if you're willing to take that step. I remember a young man at Princeton. I was doing some teaching and he had gotten a C on a paper. He had never gotten a C in his life. This is a young white guy, at Princeton University, and I gave him a C. And so, he came to my office. He was, very upset. And we worked out a plan going forward for the rest of the semester. And so he came out with a B+. A year later, he needed a recommendation for a fellowship. I was able to write that recommendation based on what I saw of his resilience. And that counts for a lot. That absolutely counts for a lot in our minds as faculty and as administrators. The student who reaches out and says, I want help.
Love it. So you have had and continue to have an extraordinary career, and one that means so much to so many, as you have developed many people who have gone on to do great things. When you think about sort of what beyond, your family, what is your greatest achievement in terms of your professional journey?
Well, you just named it, actually. It's I've got my actual kids and my actual grandkids. who are extraordinary, and I'm wonderfully proud of who they are. But then I got my other kids, right? And so, yeah, it is the relationships with those students, and the fact that they, they do continue to be part of my life. One young man from Hunter, who had graduated top of his class, he's now in the faculty at Stanford Business School. He and his new wife were in New York, and so they made a point of, let's have lunch. While they were in New York, he wanted to introduce me to his new wife. So, and so we did that. That's really, what I find to be the ultimate joy is seeing where everybody ends up and what they're doing, and sometimes connecting them with each other when that makes sense. But yeah, that's the gratification.
And if your dad could speak to you right now about how far you've come, what do you think he'd say about how far you've come?
I think he would be proud of how far I've come. I think he'd probably want to say, and now?
Well, certainly that's what driven parents do. And he'd probably be echoing a sentiment that you have said to the many thousands of students that you have worked with, and now. And I have to say, it has been an extraordinary pleasure to have you with us today on this great occasion, sharing the words of wisdom and this awesome book that many of our students will have the opportunity to get. I Can Finish College. We want to know if there's any last questions in the audience. If you'd be willing to just take one or two of those questions, be happy to. Would you be willing to answer just a couple more questions?
I love questions from students.
Absolutely. So if there's a few questions, we're happy to take them at this time.
Don't be shy.
or faculty or staff, because they wanted to come and glean as well. So if there's one or two of those, we'd certainly be willing to take them as well.
So I just wanted to highlight, I don't know if the student will share this, but it's in the chat for your reading pleasure. But if Luvan is still on with us, I think you raised an excellent point about oftentimes what students may experience when they're nervous about asking a question is they may find that that instructors or faculty may be more rewarding of those who already know the answer versus those who may have a general inquiry. And how do we as faculty, as instructors, make sure that the student that doesn't know but is willing to ask the questions to get to a place of understanding, how are they just as rewarded? And maybe rewarded is not the right word exactly, but at least that's acknowledged, so that there isn't more value placed upon already knowing the answer versus asking, if that makes any sense.
Yes, yes. I think we as, as faculty and administrators, sometimes it's a good idea to kind of remember where we were once upon a time. And that we have been in those situations ourselves, whether in school or in other contexts, and to try to reflect back on who was helpful to us. I think there's some humility in taking that, being able to go through that thought process, and that doesn't always go with the culture of the academy. But I don't think anybody gets to where they are without having, had a question, had a stumble, had a mentor, had somebody useful. And so to kind of put themselves back in those shoes and say, okay, I'm going to pay it forward. And the truth is that I think, when we do that, that we do get rewarded in the end. That, if that student comes back and like the young man from Princeton I was describing, came back and told me he had gotten, this scholarship. In fact, he asked me to write a recommendation for it. But, that was my reward for, even though I gave him the C. So we do derive some benefit from it, and understanding that that's the psychic benefit. That's the feel good.
We're going to end with a question from a student, Levon, who wrote, how might a college create or develop alums as mentors for students, or is this desirable, durable, or practical?
Oh yeah, it is desirable, doable, and practical. And I will happily connect Dr. Crosby with Katie Kreml at Bryn Mawr, who runs the program there, because we do have a pretty robust way of connecting students, alum to alum, and undergraduate to alum, based on area of career interest. I've certainly had some fascinating conversations. And then there are some things that we do that are more social, like when a graduating class moves into a particular town. So, we know that a certain number of recent grads are moving into New York City, and we have a tea to welcome them. And those that are moving into Boston, there's an event in Boston to welcome them into our alumni family, so that they can begin to make connections, sometimes with each other, finding apartments and stuff like that, and sometimes with us on finding a job and stuff like that. So there are lots of ways that we can, as institutions, we can be helpful. And it is so gratifying. I will say my class at Bryn Mawr, class of 68, we formed a Google group a number of years ago because one of our classmates, Drew Faust, became president of Harvard. And so we went crazy, right? And so we were crashing everybody's email boxes. And so we created a Google group. Well, the Google group is alive and well, and there's other things, whether it's somebody who's having a health crisis or somebody who has had another recent achievement, we all know it. We all know it. It enabled us, during COVID to go to some funerals together, thanks to Zoom. So creating that community of support, whether institutionally through the career office or facilitating, we have a ton of Facebook groups that, you can find Facebook groups for all sorts of things, but, Rockland should have a Facebook group for undergraduates and for alumni. So yes, you can definitely stay in touch.
Dr. Cantarella, I Can Finish College. Thank you so very much. You have made our day. I'm going to ask Christina Merriweather to just give us some final remarks, but what a wonderful, wonderful time. And I'm so glad to have you now as part of the Rockland Community College family. All of you can put some reactions in the reaction buttons to say thank you to Dr. Cantarella for an extraordinary a time of sharing, for an excellent book that so many of our students who will receive them will really appreciate the words that you have to say, to encourage them, to inspire them, so that they too will know that they can finish. And now, our director of our TRIO program, Christina Merriweather.
Thank you, Dr. Baston. And thank you again, Dr. Cantarella. That was amazing. And I literally have like pages of notes. So I definitely appreciate all the jewels, and the chat has been amazing. And I definitely think that people have been having some great takeaways here. I know just a couple of takeaways for me that I wrote down was, the importance, I know we spoke about this just now, about building a culture of inquiry and a safe space for our students so that they feel comfortable taking advantage of the resources, the many resources that our colleges and universities have to offer, especially here at RCC. We are very resource rich, and we want our students to know that we're here to help them and take advantage of that. And then I'd say, another takeaway that I had was about a student's journey being, rarely being linear, right? And I think that's so important. There are so many things along the way that can help our students really figure out where they want and need to be. And so it was very validating to hear that that's also in your many years of experience working with students, that, that has been your experience as well. So hopefully the students that are on the Zoom today, you were affirmed by that, and that it's okay to not have everything figured out right away. And there are plenty of people that are here to support you along your journey. So those were just a couple of my takeaways, but I'd love to launch our final poll and ask you, is there something that you took away today that you feel could be helpful in helping you be successful at college? So that poll is up on the screen. If you'll take a minute to fill that out.
While they're filling it out, I will just say that this has been great for me, because I feel like I now know another institution that manifests the kinds of values and community that I love to see available to students. And so, so I'm just really delighted to have had the chance to meet all of you.
Yes, likewise. And so I know that there are people that may not have been able to be here today. And I know this is being recorded. So we definitely want to make sure, I see the poll results that are coming up. So 100% of the people that took the poll today said they heard something during your talk that could help them be successful at college, whether they're staff or faculty helping other students. And also, there are a lot of staff and faculty on the call that may be students themselves that are continuing on with advanced degrees. So thank you again. And we want to make sure we can keep in touch and continue the conversation. So if we can just make sure that we share Dr. Cantarella's contact information, also where you can purchase the book, I Can Finish College, the Overcome Any Obstacle and Get Your Degree Guide. You can contact Dr. Cantarella via email at mycantarella@gmail.com. You also have her on Facebook. All right. I'm a big Facebook user, so I will definitely be checking out your page. You can also find her on Instagram as well as LinkedIn. And for the students on the call, I hope that you have a LinkedIn. And if you do not, please make sure you come see the Student Success Office and we can get you hooked up with a LinkedIn page, okay? Thank you again. Any final words that you'd like to share before we close up?
Well, I guess, looking at the contact information, two things. One, when the book originally came out, I had a different publisher and they priced it out of what I considered out of reach. So I took back the ownership and thanks to Facebook, re-encountered a friend who has a publishing company. And so we have priced it now down to $10. So it's within the reach of students. And so I will not get rich by any stretch of the imagination, but hopefully I will accomplish my mission, which is to help students get through college. And the second thing is, yes, that is my actual email address and I actually do answer.
All right, we have a direct line, so let's take her up on that. And also, if I see any TRIO students, I think I saw a couple of TRIO students in the chat, but we will also have your book as part of our TRIO library. So we're very excited to make sure that students have access to that resource as well. All right, well, if there is nothing else from Dr. Baston or Melissa or Dr. Lynch, any final thoughts? Otherwise, we can take it home.
Fantastic job, and thank you, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. You have a great day. Thank you for joining us.